Hey friends, it's Gloria and welcome back to another video. Happy December, last month of the year. Before we move on to December and planning, I want to talk about all the books I read in the previous month, November. I read so much this month. It was a lot. I feel like I read a lot of good books and I read a lot of stuff that was interesting and like I got through really quickly. And I did participate in Historathon, of course, the readathon that I'm co-hosting. So I'll talk about all of the historical fiction books I read. I did some nonfiction reading for Nonfiction November and a hodgepodge of other random little stuff throughout as well. Let's jump into the books and start off with historical fiction. I picked up A Curious Beginning by Deanna Reborn. This is a long, several book historical mystery romance series that is very big on BookTube and a lot of people love it. And it's one of the first books I read in November, and I think I gave this like 2 stars, 2.5. A few of you said keep going, don't give up, it gets better, but I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't think I'm going to continue. I'm not really attached to these 2 characters. I don't love the like crudeness of them. I don't know. It's not sweet and romantic and lovely. It's like kind of like grungy, dirty crudeness, but there is this historical mystery element. There's these 2 characters. They're kind of, you know, enemies to lovers or whatever, and they're trying to get away from the law. Veronica Speedwell, the main female character, is this like feisty, I'm not like other girls, I'm not gonna follow the way the society is in the 1800s in this I believe Victorian time period. I don't know. I didn't love it. I didn't love it. It was just not for me. It was not the kind of like wholesomeness I was looking for, I guess, in a romance. Not that it was really even steamy, but there is a lot of like innuendos and lusting after one another kind of thing. And I don't know, it just made me feel a little icky, but that's just me. I read another historical mystery romance series, but fantasy as well, and I finished and completed the last book in the Secrets of Ormdale. I read The Valley of Dragons, which is book 5. Wormwood Abbey is the first one, and this was such a cozy, wholesome little series. I totally loved it. It's like a 3.5, 4-star series. Very sweet, very wholesome, comforting. I loved the way everything wrapped up. It all wrapped up in a perfect, sweet little bow. It's not a perfect series. I definitely have some complaints in terms of like things I wanted from certain characters. I also wanted a little bit more of like the romance and just them being together, because the whole series is how they can't be together, and then, you know, they get together at the very end and you're like, no, but I wanted more of how you are together and the sweetness of that. I talked about this last month in October because I flew through the first 4 books of the series. This is about secret dragon keepers that live in England. So it's set at the beginning of the 1900s. They follow a girl that moves to Yorkshire with her family because they inherit this estate, and then they realize that there are dragons there and it's a secret and they need to be kept, and there's, you know, henchmen and people that want to get their hands on these dragons, and then they realize there's also other dragon families in England that are keeping dragons. It was just such a wonderful little adventure that was so lovely, and I had such a great time. Then I read 4 historical books all set during World War II. I continued the Maisie Dobbs series. I read books 12 and 13, I think that's what it is. In this Grave Hour and Journey to Munich. Maisie Dobbs continues her investigations. The beginning of the Second World War starts, and I'm continually loving the series. I don't know if I'll quite finish it by the end of the year. There's 18 books total, so I have about 5 or 6 left, and yeah, they're just fantastic. I love being with the characters and being in that world, and she's a very interesting main character to root for, so totally loved my time there. Not too much else to say about that. I did pick up The Only Woman in the Room by Marie Benedict. This fulfilled the Buzzwordathon prompt for November, and also a few Historathon prompts for me as well. And Marie Benedict is an author I've been meaning to try. She has quite an extensive backlist, and I wasn't sure how I'd fare with her, and I actually really liked this book. I didn't love the main character, but I loved knowing about her and the story, and I was here for it. Even though this wasn't like the perfect book for me, I still enjoyed my time. This is all about Hedy Lamarr, which was an actual person, a Hollywood actress in America, and the start of her life. This book is kind of set in 2 parts. The first majority of the book is set in Austria, and how she's married to a high-ranking official man in Austria who's an arms dealer, and he, you know, gets involved with the Nazis, and he's a horrendous person, and there's a ton of abuse in that marriage, and it's terrifying. She escapes and moves to America and becomes an actress, and it follows her life and journey there. And it just was like super interesting and intense and gripping, and I was there for it, and then it kind of just like deflated because it jumped so fast in time. I feel like we got a lot of preamble and then just like nothing happened at the end. I was just kind of like, and then that's it. This is what happened to this woman. This, and this, and then it ended. So all that to say, not amazingly well written, but it was very readable, and I was like here for it. I flipped through the pages and I got through the book, and I was invested all the way through, even though there were some flaws with the story for sure. But I definitely would be picking up more of Marie Benedict. Like, even though this dealt with some very heavy and intense topics, there wasn't so much meat in the story that bogged me down. And so I feel like this was a great just like highlight of this person. And I think a lot of her books center around main female characters. And so it's kind of almost like you get a little taste of, oh, this is an interesting person that experienced some interesting things in their life. And if you want a deeper dive, maybe pick up some nonfiction to pair with the historical fiction read. You know, a solid book. I'm glad I read it. No regrets. Next, I picked up one of my anticipated reads because Ruta Sepetys is a favorite author of mine. I picked up The Bletchley Riddle. She co-wrote this with Steve Sheinkin, and this is a middle grade following a young girl, a 14-year-old girl, and her older brother that work at Bletchley Park, which was this code-breaking house in England that worked to break the Enigma, which was this German coding machine thing. And unfortunately, I actively dislike this book. This was a slog to get through. I powered through it only because of respect for Ruta, because of how much I've loved her other books, and I didn't want to DNF it, but this is definitely a book I would have DNF'd if it was literally anyone else, any other author. I absolutely did not like the story at one bit. I thought it was so poorly written. I did not care about the characters. I hated the way they talked to each other and interacted. Like, it didn't even feel it didn't feel too middle grade-y, but it wasn't young adult and it wasn't adult. It was somewhere in between, and it just wasn't good. The characters were like cutouts. There was no depth. I hated the brother-sister relationship. Like, if you're gonna write about siblings, you know, at least make me love them. Like A Place to Hang the Moon by Kate Albus. That was a beautiful World War II sibling novel. This one, didn't do it. And I don't know if I just don't like the code breaking stuff. Maybe that's part of it. Like, I just was so bored and could care less. You know, there's like military and spy people involved, and they're kind of all seen as evil, and it just was very silly to me. I give this 2 stars, if that. Very, very disappointing. I was just shocked by how much I did not like this book. And I hope Ruta Sepetys writes more of what she usually does, and maybe, I don't know what the co-author provided to the story apart from her, you know, like who knows what they each did, but she's written some amazing books, and I feel like this is just such a step back from what she has written in before. So I didn't like this one, which is kind of a shocker. Next and lastly for historical fiction, and our group read for Historathon, is The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. This was a reread for me. This is set in the 1950s during the McCarthy era. It has to do with like the start of communism, how everyone's like fearing communism, and it follows 7 main female perspectives that all live in a boarding house, each of their lives and how different things happen in their lives and impact them, and then ultimately how they're all connected. They all live in this house together, and there's a supper club, so they all come together once a week and share a meal together. There's also a murder mystery at play throughout the story, and you're wondering who died in this house, and that brings a very interesting plot propelling element to the story that was great. So a good reread. You know, it's not a favorite book. When I first read it, I gave 3 stars. In conclusion with the reread, maybe it's more of a 4-star read. It's somewhere in between. I think I'm sticking to my original rating, but it was very interesting. It's very different than your usual historical fiction books out there, but very feministy in themes, if that's what you're interested in for historical novels. So those are the historical fiction books I read. And next I want to talk about a little bit of a out of left field, kind of a palate cleanser. I picked up a sci-fi apocalyptic novel. This is because of the very popular TV series Silo, based on the book series Wool by Hugh Howey. So this is a trilogy, Wool, Shift, and Dust, and I watched the first season with my husband, called Silo, which is, I realized, just half of the first book in the series. I even thought about reading the series a while back after finishing that first season, because I had so many questions when that first series ended that I want to know more. And usually when that happens, I'm like, well, I know that this is based off a book series, so the book series has to have more details. And I am glad that I read it because I got to learn a lot more details. But basically this follows a group of people that live in an underground silo. I actually don't know if the population is ever named, like how much people there are in one silo, but there's several different characters and things are not all as they seem to be. There's characters questioning why they are in this silo and why they can't go outside, and that is forbidden in that society. So we get a lot of really interesting elements at play that usually are regular tropes in these, you know, post-apocalyptic, almost utopian novels where there's a society of people and then things go awry because of some people in power that aren't making good decisions. So I did read the first book in the series. This was a 4-star read. I was very compelled, very interested. I mean, just as much as I was in this TV series. Very curious where the TV series is going to go because the second season is out. And like I said, the first series only has half of this book. So I don't know if it's going to stick to the book or just completely go a different direction, but very intriguing. And I do hope to continue with the series. I think this is definitely a recommendation for those that do love an occasional sci-fi apocalyptic book now and again, that love an adventure story. It does have like a classic sci-fi element to it. Like it feels to me a little bit like Dune. And again, this is from someone that doesn't read this genre very often at all, so take my word with a grain of salt, but this had those same kind of vibes. and thoroughly enjoyable. So that was a fun little find this month. So it's a bit later in the day. You can see the Christmas lights a bit better. And let's finish up this wrap up. Let's move on to the nonfiction reading that I got to in November, starting with Dinner for Vampires, Life on a Cult TV Show by Bethany Joy Lenz. I do love a good memoir now and again, and I did watch One Tree Hill a long while back. So I was intrigued by this one, and I actually am quite surprised that it didn't even make it into the Goodreads like memoir category, even as a nomination, because this was a fantastic memoir. If you love One Tree Hill and are familiar with this actress or love any books about cults, highly recommend. You don't even really need to be a fan of One Tree Hill to like this particular memoir, because she talks more about her actual life, her cult experience. It was really wild and hard to read, but also so interesting. You get a very like day by day glimpse of being sucked into this cult from her perspective. She took very meticulous notes and diaries like through her whole experience. So reading this felt like a story, because there was very long stretches of dialogue between people that actually happened, like conversations that actually happened, and you could feel it. You were in the room with these people, and I definitely felt the tension. I listened to the audiobook. She narrates it herself, and she did an excellent job. It was definitely a tough read, especially coming from a Christian background myself and being Christian. Just hearing how people manipulate God and scripture and different things and just warp everything to manipulate people. It's so heartbreaking and sad, especially her experience. The message on the surface of like being part of this family, being close to people, being part of this group, like everyone wants to feel belonging and known and part of something, is very tempting, and you get that, but then it's just, it all goes awry, or it's sinister at the end, and it's really heartbreaking how everything ended. But I really appreciated her view on it was never out of like regret, because she ends up with a daughter at the end, so she's very grateful for that. Even though she lived through hell, she still made it out on the other side and is better for it. And I really love, there's this part towards the end of the book when she gets out and everything happens, and she's just crying out to God, like cursing him in a sense that is just like, how dare you effing let this happen to me? And it felt very, to me, some Christians don't think like swearing is ever okay. I'm definitely like, you know, whatever you're saying to God is between you and God. Like, you could say whatever you want. So I really appreciated her moment of just pure honesty of what was happening inside her, of like how mad she was at God for everything. And I believe with how everything turned out, like I think she still has faith, which is also so incredible. You would think someone could come out of it and be super cynical and just like hate everything and hate religion and, you know, the deconstruction thing that is super popular these days. But I just overall found her story so incredible. And it is not a preachy book at all. It is a story of her experience, which was absolutely heartbreaking, but would highly recommend if you love a cult book. Next, I picked up Disney High, The Untold Story of the Rise and Fall of Disney Channel's Tween Empire by Ashley Spencer. This came on my radar because I saw someone give it 4 stars, and then it was in the Goodreads nominees for a nonfiction read, and it just sounded kind of fun, like a fun little listen. And I would say it is for someone who very much loved Disney Channel. This covers the height of Disney Channel, starting with Even Stevens, Lizzie McGuire, That's So Raven, Hannah Montana, High School Musical, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, Selena Gomez, Demi Lovato, and the Jonas Brothers. That main chunk of time in like the early 2000s. It was a very nostalgic, fun look at the past and brought back a lot of memories of how much time I spent watching all of those things. I like so vividly remember watching High School Musical and being absolutely in love with it. Reading this book, it definitely made me want to go back and watch some things like High School Musical and Lizzie McGuire Movie are both like top tier. But this was just the behind the scenes of everything that went down on Disney. And it does have that like dark side of Hollywood, kind of how people were treated poorly and different producers and actors and actresses were treated wrongly and like things that happen behind the scenes. The author is a big fan of Disney and also a journalist, and so she writes this story to just go behind the scenes of everything. And overall, I found it interesting because I have previous experience with the topic, but I would say it's like niche enough that if you don't care at all about the Disney Channel, nothing about this book would be interesting to you. But that's kind of like a duh. Then I picked up Band of Brothers by Stephen E. Ambrose. This is a short little nonfiction account about the 101st Airborne and Easy Company during World War II. I picked this up solely because my husband and I started watching the show that came out in 2001, the 10-episode miniseries that was on HBO. What an incredible show. Like, it's probably a guilty pleasure of mine. I don't know if I should be guilty about it, but I love a good military film and show now and again. I don't watch them too often, but I have in the past watched a lot of them. And I'm like I'm a pacifist at heart. I'm like, I kind of am anti-war, if I'm honest. So I don't even really love military war things, but I love a good film and show now again. And if you, for whatever reason, are also interested in like World War II and have never watched Band of Brothers, it's incredible. fantastic. I was a little jarred at first to see Ross from Friends in like the opening scenes of the first episode, but that was a funny character. Anyways, I watched the show in November, which was excellent. We actually started the first episode on Veterans Day. What a fantastic miniseries that made me want to read the book, because that's just how I am. If there's a book that goes along with the show or a movie, then I'm gonna try to read it. It pretty much covered everything that the show covered, but the show covered way more detailed because it was 10 hours versus 5-hour audiobook. But the book does give a quick account of things that happened to these men. This specific company that did a lot of really intense fighting. They were crucial during D-Day when Americans invaded Normandy. And it was a good read. It was like a 3-star book, like average. It was very quick and just statements of fact. Like, you didn't get to know characters or people very well. It was very broad strokes. So I really appreciated the pairing with the show that dived in a lot deeper. Next, I picked up Things to Look Forward to by Sophie Blackall, 52 Large and Small Joys for Today and Every Day. I highlighted this author, I believe in September. I picked up all of her picture books because that's how I'm familiar with her. And I saw that this book of hers was also available at my library, but it came in a little bit later. This is a beautiful illustrated little book about 52 things that bring people joy. She wrote this specifically during COVID and the lockdown when people weren't able to be together, and this was her way to find joy in the little things in life. It was sweet for the most part. I liked it. I found it very much a book set in COVID. Like, this just brought back being in lockdown and being kind of sad to not be connecting with people. This book definitely has a place for those that, you know, you want to think about the little fun things in life. This is for people that love romanticizing things. Like, I get it. And the illustrations were lovely in here. Absolutely love them. But the text itself felt like little random journal diary entries from the author, which they were actually. She wrote these all down in like a notebook and then put it together in a book. It felt just a little bit like, okay, you know, some things were just kind of random and very specific to her and not really relatable, and some stuff was sweet and relatable. So it was just kind of this hodgepodge book. I gave it 3 stars. I liked it. Like, I'm glad I read it because I'm a fan of the author and want to read, you know, her backlist and be familiar with it. Wouldn't see myself ever rereading this because this felt very like COVID-y to me, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but then since we were talking about a picture book author, I will mention another nonfiction that I picked up randomly because I went to the library with my son and this was just sitting on the table and I read it and I was like, well, I guess I'll check it out and tell people about it because I found it interesting. Smelly Kelly and His Super Senses, How James Kelly's Nose Saved the New York City Subway by Beth Anderson and Jen Harney. This is a very specific little nonfiction story about a real man that lived in New York City that worked for the subway system that uncovered leaks and disasters and things that went wrong because he had an incredible elevated sense of smell. And it was a fun little nonfiction read, like a great little story with fun color design. I felt like this was a really good mix of fun illustrations and good nonfiction storytelling. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I bet if there are some kids out there that love to learn about stinky things and garbage and fun stuff, they would like this book for sure. So this was a fun little read. And then my picture book author highlight for the month, because I've been doing it the past few months and it's been super fun, was gonna be John Hendricks. Well, it is. I read a few of his books, but I couldn't get the full extent of his reading. My first exposure to him as an author is The Faithful Spy, one of my favorite books. This is a combined nonfiction and graphic novel about Dietrich Bonhoeffer set during World War II, and he just came out with a new one that I could not get my hands on in time at the library. It's called The Myth Makers, and it's all about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. I'm very eager to get my hands on that one, but I couldn't in time. But I did pick up another graphic novel of his that's out there that I didn't realize. This is called The Holy Ghost, and this was a quirky, fun little read, but not really my cup of tea. I really hate philosophy and like big theological discussions, just not really my jam. And this was like his personal little project for himself that he decided to put out to the world. But he basically has a atheist squirrel and a zealot badger and then the Holy Ghost, which is supposed to represent like the Holy Spirit in scripture. And it is just like philosophical little ramblings. They're almost kind of like standalone web comics is what it feels like. Like none of these comics correlate to each other. They're all just on their own. And they're usual just philosophical spiritual ponderings. This was quirky and sweet, but not my cup of tea. But I think for those that love philosophy and theology and just like fun little conversations that could make you laugh and bring up interesting questions, this would totally be your read. I really appreciated his author's note at the end. I think it made me like this book a little bit more. He basically said, you can't have faith without doubt. And this is his personal kind of like ramblings about doubt and questions raised about, you know, why God does certain things and why does this happen and why do bad things happen to good people, and like just big questions and other silly little questions along the way. And he brought them to life really well with these cute little characters. Then the 2 graphic novels of his that I did read, I counted them as kind of nonfiction and historical fiction hybrids. So that worked for Historathon. The first one is Shooting at the Stars, The Christmas Truce of 1914. This highlights the Christmas Day truce that happens during World War I, where the Germans and the English seized fire for a day and went in the middle and celebrated Christmas together, and they put up Christmas trees and sang songs and shared a meal and acted like human beings. And this was told like through a letter of one of the soldiers writing to his mom, and it was a really well done book. I loved his illustration style, and also the words just was really well done, so I'm glad I picked that one up. And the other one, I learned about a character in history that I didn't know anything about, and that is John Brown, His Fight for Freedom. This is in the late 1850s, right around the Civil War time, about a man who is Christian but also an abolitionist, and he was kind of an extremist. And there are like 2 sides. Like some people think he was a terrorist and anti-America, and then other people were like, no, he actually fought for slaves to be free. And so just briefly it talks about his life and the things that he did for anti-slavery during that time. So I read several of his books, and I have several more to go. Maybe I'll do a separate video one day on him when I read all of his works, but it was fun to dive into some of his stuff for sure. And then 2 random little picture books that I'll mention that I picked up for myself. I didn't even read these to Finn. You Are a Honeybee by Laurie Ann Thompson was okay. This is the perspective of if a kid is reading it, then they pretend that they are a honeybee and they get to do the little actions that the bee does. So it takes them through the bee's day, and then it shows what the child can do to mimic the bee. It was sweet, a fine honey book. Not my favorite. And I picked up Wonder Bear by Tao New on a whim at the library because I thought this cover was beautiful. And this is a fully wordless picture book, which I talked about last month that I explored. I forgot his name, but he's a fully wordless picture book author. And this was beautiful and whimsical about these 2 people that start a garden, and out of the garden grows a plant. And from that plant comes a wondrous, magical little bear that pulls fun, whimsical things out of his hat. And I absolutely love the color palette. I love bold, bright, colorful illustrations, and this did not disappoint. It was stunning. It was a fun little story. I totally loved it. It was very quirky and sweet, so would highly recommend Wonder Bear. And that's it. That wraps up my reading. A lot of historical fiction, some nonfiction, some picture books, and random little stuff along the way. Yeah, it was a good reading month overall, and I hope to bring some more book videos to you coming in December. I have a lot of fun ideas. We'll see what time I have to make all these videos, but I do want to make some more. So I appreciate you guys so much for watching and spending some time with me, and I'll hopefully see you in some more book videos soon. Bye!